probably better than it would have been in theatre. It had the kind of ritualistic quality that Greek plays, to some extent, need to have. But we've also been able to do things that sort of fight the context. The Peony Pavilion was an odd thing to do here, and odd in Meminger Auditorium before the renovation. But it, I think, worked enormously well, and I think that the audiences that didn't really know what the heck they were coming to were nonetheless intrigued by this 17th century or 16th century Chinese opera. The Monkey, Journey to the West, was also a kind of cross-cultural thing that actually got the largest audience of anything that we've ever done at the festival. We had to add performances. We did 18 or 19 performances in, I think it was 19, more or less. I was just checking with Paul Edwards, who's a PR person, just to make sure I was right. In the Satilli, and that, I mean, it was a retelling of the story of the Monkey King, it's a very well-known story about how Buddhism was introduced into China, and I mean, it's clearly a metaphor about animism and Buddhism and how one of them comes together. But anyway, it worked extraordinarily well in the Satilli. I mean, well, we do the press here, so I can't mention things that we were going to do. And I mean, there are other things that really we have done in order to challenge audiences and perhaps also challenge the context. I mean, one of the sort of most controversial was an exhibition that we did in 1991, Places of the Past, in which we asked 18 or 19 artists to create works that were inspired by memory, because this is a city of memory. And some of those pieces were extremely controversial. The whole thing was relatively controversial. But it also got an audience to go to places in Charleston that they hadn't been previously. It also got an enormously large audience for us. And it was an interesting way of trying to explore this absolutely fabulous city. And one of the things that I'm particularly pleased about is that there are some parts of Places of the Past, some of the artwork that was created for that are still here. Another wonderful thing we did that did challenge its context was the Don Giovanni that we did a number of years ago in Meminger, which inspired the renovation of Meminger. We used Meminger as a black box before it was a black box, so that we were able to cover over all the seats and create a stage that was as big as the entire theater. And that is a very difficult thing to do anymore. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do because usually theaters are not just sort of sitting there empty, and it was wonderful for us that we had a theater that had been condemned. Sort of wonderful for us that we had a theater that had been condemned, that was available throughout the year, that could be transformed in this particular way, that where there could be, I mean, the Gunther Kramer, who's the director, wanted to have spring, sort of summer, and then winter. He definitely wanted this to be a production in which you knew that, because we all do know, that the decline of Don Giovanni was inevitable, that he would inevitably be doomed. And it was a terrific opportunity that that particular theater provided us. We've also tried to sometimes look at other parts of the past in Charleston. Certainly, we did an Echoes of Africa program a number of years ago, because this city is not only a city that has had Western European culture for so long, but it's also the city through which, and whether it's the plurality or majority of Africans arrived in this country, nonetheless, whether it's the plurality or majority, doesn't matter. It's so many arrived through this country bringing a culture that has made certainly American dance and American music absolutely was such an influence throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Now there are other places that are influencing American culture, so it's not simply those two roots, but certainly those two roots are enormously important, and Charleston conjures that up. And then, obviously, part of the fun and challenge is introducing contemporary voices. The audience here is so willing to see things that they haven't seen that we can get a sold-out audience for companies that don't expect it. This past year, Galeen Dance was at the Meminger and did enormously well. Andrea Miller is the woman who is the head of this company. And just as an aside, my wife also runs a festival in New York. She runs a theater in New York, but she runs a festival that just took place in the last few weeks called Fall for Dance, which is in which 20 dance companies come to a city center, which is a 2,700-seat theater in New York, and always sells out within the first day. Her trick is that the tickets cost $10. We can't afford to do that, so even though I think we would sell out in a day if we were able to sell tickets for $10 each. But anyway, Andrea Miller was also at and Galeen Dance were also at Fall for Dance, where they got the largest audience that they'd ever had, because it was 2,700 seats in this theater. But the experience in Spoleto was the first experience where they had been able to sell out like this. And people seemed to be thrilled with what they were doing. They are now on a trajectory which is, I think, going to be fabulous for them. Imbal Pinto, that was here this year, we would have added some extra performances, but it's very difficult to add performances. We basically have the theaters as full as possible. Ohad Nahareen, who has been here repeatedly, is now a choreographer who is celebrated everywhere. Shantala, who is an Indian dancer, who is bringing a contemporary aspect to Indian dance, is someone again who got a full house here in a way that would just not be possible anywhere else. But what makes this all work is that there are wonderful theaters here, and there's a wonderful audience. But what I think that the festival's responsibility is to do something more than just do a wonderful event during the course of the year. We don't have to tell people here, we've had our ups and downs over the years, financially and so on. But fortunately, things seem to be working out pretty well now. And we have been able to spearhead some renovations, obviously the Meminger, the Dock Street, and I hope certainly at the Gilliard, that we would be involved in some way at the Gilliard, although that is not Spoleto's project at all, it's obviously the city's project. But I think also what we wanted to bring is an artist's eye view to the city, and in some ways to look at the city through the eyes of artists, because I think it provides a different perspective than those of town planners, those of whatever, I mean, the rest of us. And again, a parenthetical thing that Caroline didn't mention in that very nice introduction. She didn't mention that I grew up in Rome. I went to high school in Italy, in Rome. And one of the wonderful things about Rome is obviously gorgeous art all over the place, it's a wonderful city, but there are also small things, there are tiny little things that you relish. And there's a little fountain here, or a little temple there, or a corner that you see a Roman ruin in, that are not important in and of themselves, but are talismans for the city. And that is something that I hope that Spoleto leaves in some ways. I mentioned that I was thrilled that there are parts of places from the past that are still here. There's Ron Jones' monument to Denmark Vesey in the Emmanuel AME Church on Calhoun Street. There's a Martha Jackson Jarvis sort of thing on, I mean, it's a cenotaph, and it's a spirit tree in the garden of St. Luke's Reformed Episcopal Church on Nassau Street. There's Pearl Friars wonderful heart garden that's just off Menotti Street. There's that David Hamilton, David Hammond's The Smallest House in America on America Street, which is, I think, a kind of wonderfully provocative piece, and something that is just, if you haven't seen, it's worth driving by, because they are just so unexpected, and you think, what is that there? And I think that that is to some extent what Spoleto should lead. It should be provocative. It should leave you filled with, I hope, pleasure and joy, but also with a certain number of memories, a certain number of questions. So, anyway, I've killed 45 minutes, and Carolyn said that I should leave time for questions. If anyone has any, I'd be delighted to.
One always reads about the first performance of a Mozart opera in his time, or Beethoven conducting when he was dead. But these days, to put on a work that the audience is completely unfamiliar with in a big venue like the Lincoln Center or here seems almost much braver than it did in the past. And I wondered, do you try to guide the audience's understanding of the piece through the program, through introductions, or do you just let them respond completely spontaneously and just hope that they see it the way?
Well, I think one of the things that's happened is websites have become much more sophisticated, and so we're doing much more of that preparatory stuff than we used to do. I mean, there's much more of it. But when I suppose we've done at Lincoln Center, we've done 3 or 4 operas by Salvatore Sciarrino. Now, Salvatore Sciarrino is probably not someone that everyone is conversant with. He is now one of the 2, now that Giacomo is dead, one of the 2 or 3 leading operatic composers in Italy. And the work is, on some level, pretty difficult. And it's surprising how well people inform themselves independently. I mean, certainly when we first started doing it in New York, we didn't have a kind of a fabulous website. We did some additional concerts and so on to give a bit of a context, but I mean, you had to give those as well. And we got great audiences for both. And I think that one of the things that is, I mean, if there's a distinction between the audiences here and the audiences in New York, it's that the audience here is open to everything and probably is less a kind of a niche audience. That is, that when we get an audience for Sciarrino in New York, it's a Sciarrino audience. It's not a festival-wide audience. When we get an audience here for the Peony Pavilion or some other thing that is, sort of relatively off the beaten track, is very much a festival-wide audience. It's people that are from all over. And I think there are advantages to each. I mean, we did all the pansori in New York. And the pansori are the epic poems of Korea. And the Japanese had tried to stamp them out when the Japanese had taken over Korea in the 20th century. And only a few remained. There were 7 that remained, and we did them all. There were people, and some of them were funny, and you could tell that there were Koreans in the audience because they laughed. When they heard something, the non-Korean speakers laughed when they saw it on the supertitles. So you knew who was who. But again, we got an audience of people who, I mean, we got an audience of people who really came because they were sort of culturally inquisitive rather than they knew all that much about the pansori. And it's interesting. And there are pros and cons to each.